Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you and welcome to Islam and Life with me, Tariq Ramadan, broadcasting from London. In today's show, we ask the question, what is the image of Muhammad, peace be upon him, in mainstream Western society?
A national poll conducted by YouGov shows that 69% of people believe that Islam encourages the oppression of women. Only 6% of people associate Islam with justice, and again, a mere 6% believe that Islam promotes active measures to protect the environment. Overall, nearly half of all people in the UK believe that Islam does not have a positive impact on British society. These views have directly affected the image of the Prophet, peace be upon him. To look at the issue from a Westerner's perspective, Islam and Life will investigate what is the image of Prophet Muhammad in mainstream Western society.
It's an important question after the crisis, the cartoon crisis in Denmark and in other countries. What we heard about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is quite worrying about the image of Islam and the understanding of who was the messenger, peace be upon him, and what is his role within the Muslim community. So these are two programs that we'll have on this discussion. The first is really about the perception in mainstream Western society, and we'll have another program on how it is the Prophet, peace be upon him, is perceived from within the Muslim communities and also the Muslim majority countries, and another vision of his presence and his role within the Islamic tradition and within the Islamic communities in the West. Let us today focus on this image in the mainstream Western society, why the perception is so negative, what is the perception that we have towards the Prophet, peace be upon him, himself, and in which way this could be understood and reformed from within and among the Muslims, the European Muslims, the Western Muslims in the West, but also, of course, in the Muslim majority countries. So to answer all these questions, I'm joined by Myriam Francois, Cerrah, an author and the spokesperson for Inspired by Muhammad campaign. Myriam, thank you for being with us today. Let me start with your personal journey towards Islam, because 7 years ago you converted to Islam. Before that, you were a Westerner. You were looking at the Muslims, looking at this Islamic tradition from outside. Mm-hmm. What was the perception that you had at that time of the messenger, peace be upon him, Islam as a whole, and how would you explain this perception?
I think I had a very negative perception of Islam. I come from a sort of French background, attended a French school, so I had a number of friends who were Muslims by culture, Muslims by background. And I always saw Islam as something that was sort of holding them back, sort of an element of repression. I deemed religion in general actually to be something that was, well, an opiate, if you like, something that was holding people back from sort of real mental emancipation, and was coming at it from the sort of tradition of Cerrah and, you know, humanism. And so I really looked at anybody who sort of adhered to a religious outlook as having, you know, adhering to fairy tales, really.
Any religious background?
Any religious background, and specifically because we tended to find that, you know, apart from a small minority of Catholics that we find in France, most people don't really practice religion that much, except for some Muslims who do hold on to certain elements. So I generally had a fairly negative image of Muslims until I got to university. And I think it was the first time that I encountered practicing Muslims, and it was the first time that my stereotypes were challenged by practicing Muslims. So,
okay, let us speak first about the Prophet himself. What was the image that did you remember? Which kind of perception we had about the Prophet, peace be upon him, himself, and beyond? Of course, this was before the crisis, the Danish cartoon. So before that, what kind of perception did you have?
Well, I think the main thing that I can say is that I obviously regarded anyone who followed the model of a man in the 7th century to be absolutely mad. I mean, why would anybody model their life in the 21st century on a man in the 7th century? That was my main image. But I think aside from that, I had all the sort of sometimes we can say little information is dangerous. So snippets of information. I knew that he'd had several wives. I knew that one of his wives was very young, and so a lot of these things, culminated in this image of this power-hungry imposter. I think stuff like. It's strange to say that now from where I'm sitting, but these were the images that were fairly widespread, and I think are fairly widespread today.
So you would say that if you have to assess what is happening now in the West, in Western society, is still even more this perception than it was for you before you converted to Islam?
Certainly, I think the perception of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, has got worse. So in addition to some of the stereotypes that people had of a kind of warmongering, power-hungry, lustful man, astaghfirullah, which was what we saw, we now have, in addition to that, the sort of real violence that people now assume is associated with him. And sort of, obviously, one of the main issues is the decontextualization of specific events within the Prophet ﷺ's life. And of course, the way that we have received this information, I mean, the tradition of Orientalism and the whole idea that the information that we have about the Prophet, peace be upon him, was filtered through specific objectives. I mean, the way that the West started to learn about Islam was, of course, through the Muslim world's occupation, as they saw it, of the Holy Land, of Jerusalem. Information was acquired in order to defeat the Muslims. It was acquired in order to buttress support for the Christian Crusades in order to ensure that people really had an understanding of Muslims as very different to themselves, as the Prophet is very different to their Prophet. Yeah.
Yes.